this one up. This pathetic mess. I really, man. Anyway, so as many of you know, Megan Thee Stallion and Representative Maxine Waters got together and had a damn discussion, right? And this was at the request of Maxine Waters, right? And it became, you know, kind of Voltron Power Woman connection, celebration of Megan's song WAP. And this was supposed to be argued to be an audacious gesture. You can find this on TMZ.com, but you can also find a longer kind of report done on Harper'sBazaar.com, where they talked about misogynoir, right? Saying no, and the genius of WAP. The genius. Jesus Christ. Anyway, in terms of the Harper's Bazaar article, it says it's no wonder then that Representative Waters reached out to Megan after her op-ed to say, we need your voice in this fight. Megan's public image, with her frank and funny talk about sex, bodies, and desire, and her slick, alluring outfits, can seem a product of our current moment. But she's working in a much older tradition. It's the tradition of the jazz singer, the blues woman, the wayward girl, those black women who took the parts of life they were told were unspeakable, the pleasure they felt, and owned their own bodies and turned it into a vibrant, original art form. In her ode to the possibilities found in willful women, wayward lives, beautiful experiments, Saida Hartman wrote, "Waywardness is an ongoing exploration of what might be. It is an improvisation with the terms of social existence. When the terms have already been dictated, when there is little room to breathe, it is the untiring practice of trying to live when you were never meant to survive. Or, as Meg herself has put it, I'm a problem nobody's solving." It says, and this came from Megan, when women choose to capitalize on our sexuality to regain our own power, we are vilified and disrespected. Now, they didn't do this conversation, right? And the article transcribes some of the conversations. And at a particular point, Megan says, I was raised by women. I had my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my aunt. Growing up, they always taught me you can do whatever you want to do, be whoever you want to be, as long as you're a woman who knows at the end of the day, you don't have to depend on anybody else. Get out of here, get out here in the world and make it yours. Now that I'm in a position where I felt like I have to give back to my community, my women, I want everybody to feel the way that I feel growing up. So there's a couple of tropes in here that I read for a purpose, right? That I'm trying to point out here. One, I've talked in the past about what I call the gynopotestal family. And basically what that refers to is in this gynocracy that we have in the black community, this female-led community where men somehow get all the critique, but in every measurable manner, it's actually women that are running the majority of the community in terms of the major institutions, right? And so we have this kind of framework where in the last 50 years, most especially, black men have been targeted for underdevelopment. Appreciate that, King. I don't want to mess up your first name. Very appreciate the generous donation. Thank you. But in this gynocracy, where black men have been targeted in ways that women haven't, right? In regard to employment, in regard to, incarceration, in regard to, even having a home to live in, right? What we found is an access for black women, right? Lower level black women had an access to welfare, despite the man in the house rule that prevented men from being present. And even though, and I read this in an earlier report, and one I have coming out on the Institute for Black Male Studies site that I'll be able to be sharing with you shortly. So keep watching my page. I have a video coming out called basically the 11 policies that broke up the American black family. So keep an eye out for that. You're going to like it. Anyway, so when we look at, lower level black women were able to have welfare that men couldn't get. And even after those policies were formally denounced, the practice of denying men is still happening, right? So on the lower levels, you have this bifurcated gender access to welfare. On the middle class level, you had this access to higher education, right? And we know that from 1976 to now, black men only have half the degrees black women do. Now, that doesn't qualify for STEM jobs. You know, black men are still going into STEM, but the very numbers of black men going in are less. The degree to which black men are, even as early as kindergarten, shifted often to special ed, we ignore. The fact that only about 10% of the black boys are literate by the 8th grade, we ignore. So we celebrate our women and girls having this access. We ignore the denunciation, the exclusion of black males, and then anyone who calls it out is dismissed as a sexist, right? And then from there, when I talk about this gynoprotestal framework, what I'm saying is when you have that kind of multi-generational institutional response to the black community where girls and women have stable access, boys and men are ignored, you end up with families that look like Megan's. What did she say? She said, I was raised by women. I had my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my aunt. Even on the dating scene, I will run into women who literally live, grown women in their 40s, who live with their mothers, have daughters, have a grandmother that lives down the street or maybe in the back room. They are families of women with no male present, multi-generationally, right? How then are those women socialized to see men? Even if they have sons, I'll tell you how. I literally know people who have sons who are sleeping in the goddamn park, sons who are homeless, and yet these very educated women will be setting up organizations for Black Girls Rock. And I'm not joking. I'm not playing. Educated women with secure incomes, right, who are doing their thing, will have sons who are addicts, who are homeless, and they will literally create programs for girls, some of whom don't even have girls. They don't even have daughters, but they go out of their way to advocate for women and girls, despite the men and the boys in their own families who are failing with no support. This is the dynamic that we're at right now, where you've been socialized to see women achieving and accomplishing and to not see males at all. And males only become an issue when you need one, like in this last year's pandemic. But the problem we have is by the time you need one, you don't even know how to talk to one. I'm not talking about just superficially, somebody you see at work. No, but how to actually engage it. We don't have it. Because for the most part, black men have been made invisible, even when they're standing right in front of you, right? So when I listen to this conversation between her and Maxine Waters, and they're celebrating this WAP dynamic, and they're celebrating the strength and power of women and multi-generational, for you to celebrate this, knowing full well what actually had to happen to your men for you to see the women you grew up with, and you have no word to say about it. I'm not even going to get into the Tory Lanez crap, but there's been so much difficulty with that in terms of what actually happened, what didn't, and how she was able to profit off of that to the detriment of black men yet again. It's ridiculous to me. So what I see here is a multi-generational connection between two women who are well known and are celebrating this dynamic to the detriment of their men and viewing it as an accomplishment. But my other question is, when we just looked at the data we did about being single in the black community, right? When we look at that data, my question is, appreciate that, Barry. My question is, how many of these black women actually want this wayward life they're talking about? I mean, I just read that, and I read that on purpose. The Saida Hartman piece on waywardness and the celebration of wayward, strong-willed women. Okay. This is the programming most particularly Generation X got. My generation was the first one that got this hardcore. And we had mothers and grandmothers that really put that in our daughters. They didn't tell boys shit. All they said to boys is your job is to support her. As a young boy, to tell you don't ever hit girls, support her. When you get older, they pretty much tell you to put her on a pedestal and support her. And then the girls, they told, go out and get the world. They didn't mention how these programs and structures were in place for them in ways that weren't for their boys. They didn't mention that at all. She went to college. He was in and out of jail. Their brother and sister around the same age. Nobody talked about why and what the differences were in their access to society. Nobody talked about that. We just left it alone, and we celebrated the girls. And the girls grew up. Appreciate that, Rick. Appreciate the support. The girls grew up with this, succeed at all costs dynamic, this wayward idea. But one of the things we're finding in the last year is that maybe waywardness is not necessarily lauded by actual women. It's just the way they've been programmed. They've been programmed to appreciate this wayward dynamic, but how many of them really want that life? Again, that's one of the important aspects of Kevin Samuels' show. When the majority of women that call in and say, no, I don't want to work. I don't want to work to pay significant bills. I want a husband who pays those bills. Now, this is interesting, right? Because we're told that as wayward women, they don't want that. The reality is, when you talk about traditionalism versus this waywardness, and I'm just going to call it that for the moment, they want to cherry pick from both. They want the freedom to not have to work, while at the same time, all the accolades for doing so strictly on their terms. Men in that regard simply become the backdrop. Appreciate that, T-Fitness. They become the backdrop. They become these walking ATM machines that you guys hear me talk about in the closing of my show, right? We're expected to finance her dreams, shut up, fit in the image that she wants to create, and play your part. That's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what your job is. I've been told this even in my own personal life. I had a woman even tell me a few years ago, I want you to buy me a $900,000 house. I want you to support and raise my kids while I go be in the news and do my thing. And I want to quit my job so you pay for everything. Cook the food, do this and that. I'm like, what? Are you serious? And I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She said, well, your money is our money and my money is my money, and I want you to take care of the family and do. These are the expectations brought to men, right? Even men who are in the top 10%, even though many of these women believe that we're 80% of the men. These are the same sets of expectations that are brought because of this kind of conditioning here, right? And when I laughed and asked her, well, let me just ask you, would you even respect a dude who would do all of that? She looked at the ground and she never replied because at the end of the day, she couldn't. But it was what she was trained to ask for and expect. And again, we come back to expectations. If this is what you're trained to expect, even though it's not something you really want, it's not something you would appreciate someone for. As a matter of fact, you would respect him less for doing it. But anybody who can't do it is a valueless man to you. How exactly are we supposed to couple with this kind of conflicting mess? So now we're celebrating a waywardness that I would argue most women really don't want at the end of the day, because waywardness ends up meaning you have no support. And what does Kev say most? You die alone. And I've covered articles in the last year of women dying alone in their 60s, in their 70s, even in their 50s, and telling people straight up, this was a lie. It was a lie. It wasn't true. This feminist fantasy wasn't real. The white women that propagated it got married. It was a lie, and I bought into the lie. I got paid well for a while, and then all of a sudden I got replaced by a younger woman in celebration of womanness, and now I'm broke and taking care of older family members by myself and dying alone. We were sold this waywardness crap. I'll tell you, we really were.